sure a lot of you anime-only folks are eagerly waiting for what the upcoming Jujutsu Kaisen anime holds. With one of the best arcs in the entire series on its way to being animated, there is no shortage of excited exclamations heard through the grapevine everywhere in the fandom. Everything you thought you knew about the power scaling and strength of characters is about to be rebuked, refined, and rewritten. So I figured it would be a fun idea to talk about the 5 most broken techniques in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, in a battlefield of overpowered top dogs. These techniques hold the potential to solo everyone and devastate any opponent if used correctly by the right person. To keep this video relatively free of spoilers, I will be focusing on the techniques themselves rather than the characters using them. However, be warned that the manga-only content will be touched upon later in this video. Before anyone starts going ham and typing essays in the comments, let's get one thing straight. This list is about broken potential, not just the raw wins. JJK thrives on unfair abilities and loopholes, so creating these lists is less about logic and more about the controlled chaos each technique is capable of. With all of that out of the way, let's get right to it. Kicking off this list with a fan-favorite technique, we have Mahito's idle transfiguration. Being one of the earliest deadly techniques to be showcased on screen, it is laudable that it made this list. Anyone who is familiar with Jujutsu Kaisen knows the scope of idle transfiguration, which allows Mahito to bend and break the souls of his enemies as he sees fit. Because the soul is directly targeted, a single touch spells guarantee death for most people, since conventional durability is utterly meaningless. Moreover, idle transfiguration can be used by the user on themselves to reshape their soul and cure any injury, granting them extreme regeneration and versatility without the use of reverse curse technique. What puts Mahito's idle transfiguration a touch above the rest is that it allows for instant death or extreme mutilation. Additionally, the technique, being as versatile as it is, evolves mid-combat, so the only limitation is the user's own battle experience. Idle transfiguration is unsettling because it turns the human body into a concept rather than a rule, and watching it in action feels less like a fight and more like a violation. Every encounter carries the weight and dread that one mistake means erasure, not just ungodly amounts of damage. Taking all of that into account, this has to be one of, if not the scariest technique in the series, unless you have Gege's infallible plot armor, of course. Next up, we have one of my all-time favorites in the entire series, Inumaki's Cursed Speech. When I first saw Bonito Flake Boy on screen, I knew he was going to be a certified badass. And I was right. And the Inumaki clan's cursed speech is ridiculously overpowered, with the only limitation being the user's reserve of cursed energy. With this technique, any command uttered aloud is backed by cursed energy, forcing the target and reality itself to obey. Therefore, cursed speech bypasses the traditional hurdles of speed, durability, and defenses instantly. With just a single word like stop or die, an experienced user can end the battle if the opponent is unguarded. That makes it one of the foolproof, hard counters against close-range fighters in the series, even disrupting others' dominant domains before they can fully form. However, Cursed Speech is the equivalent of a glass cannon mage build in Dark Souls, with the user suffering recoil damage depending on the severity of their uttered command. While a simple "subscribe to my channel" would only tickle someone's throat, telling someone to sit through One Piece filler or be blown away takes a much greater toll on the body. Jokes aside, please subscribe to my channel so I can afford name brand Nutella. Cursed speech is one of those techniques that feels simple until you think about it for more than 5 seconds. There's something innately terrifying about an ability that does not have to rely on explosions or beams, but on a single word coldly whispered at the right time. By design, this technique is very dependent on the user, so someone like Yuta, despite having copied cursed speech, would make much better use of it than most of the Inumaki clan. Speaking of Yuta, we have his authentic mutual love next up on this list. It takes the best parts of his copy technique and pairs them with the sure hit effect of his domain expansion. Before we get into that though, can we talk about how cool his technique looks? Authentic mutual love conjures a seemingly endless battlefield with thousands of katanas stuck in the ground, each one representing a technique that Yuta has copied from other sorcerers over the years. With his domain, he is free to use any of the techniques and blast away even the strongest of enemies with minimal effort. I want you all to sit for a second and imagine how absurdly broken his domain expansion is. Pair any other curse technique from this list with the guaranteed one-shot of the domain expansion, and you have a recipe for disaster. What this means is that theoretically, authentic mutual love scales infinitely with the user as they gain more exposure and copy more techniques. Yuta's domain feels less like a refined sorcerer's technique and more like a Resident Evil cheat menu unlocked after beating the main game. Every time authentic mutual love appears, the stakes immediately spike, and nobody can confidently say how the battle will turn out. All that is known is that the poor sap on the enemy team is getting absolutely bodied. Having said all that, being a jack of all trades comes at a cost, which is a lack of specialization in specific techniques. Honestly though, who needs specialization when you can outdo and brutally mog all of your enemies in pure Akira Kurosawa fashion? You know what's more iconic than Kurosawa though? Writing yourself into a corner with an absurdly powerful character with absurdly powerful techniques. For the least surprising entry on this list, we have Gojo's Unlimited Void. Now, I could have just talked about Limitless, and everyone would still consider it broken, but Unlimited Void takes the cake when it comes to overpowered and downright cracked techniques from Satoru's arsenal. This technique allows the user to give the limitless physical form as an endless abyss. Here, the enemy is flooded with endless bouts of information that leave them instantly paralyzed. Just as I was in high school algebra. Much like Nanami's domain expansion, Unlimited Void is considered a surefire way to achieve victory once the target has been ensnared. Furthermore, it requires no follow-up attack, since the fraction of a second spent inside the domain is enough to cripple and devastate any opponent unfortunate enough to get trapped inside. Pair all of that with a heightened curse energy awareness like that of Six Eyes, and counterattacks become nigh impossible. Furthermore, Unlimited Void is effective against both cursed spirits and powerful sorcerers, since durability stops mattering. That's why people don't lose to Gojo, they just stop functioning. But what if reality itself stopped functioning? Would that warrant a spot on this list, even if some other technique eventually surpassed it and took its spot? That's right, for the only honorable mention on this list, we have Takaba's innate technique, Comedian. This technique feels like it made its way from the dungeons of some fanfiction and overstayed its welcome. But that is part of the charm, to be honest. It does not rely on any of the usual fluff. JJK is iconic for its dramatic takedowns and drawn-out back and forth, but Comedian says, nah, screw that, and goes for an instant shutdown instead. That is what makes this technique so efficient and merciless. Now, this technique has yet to make its way to the screen, but I just had to include it, seeing how it is a manga-only technique for now. I will try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. Comedian allows its user to warp reality as they see fit, entirely dependent on their sense of humor. As long as it tickles the funny bone in their body, they can manifest it into existence. What makes this technique so absurd is how it ignores and defies all logic, scaling, and even conventional combat rules. To really make my point sit with you, consider the fact that this technique has damaged top-tier villains without the user even fully understanding how. Not only can Comedian manifest objects from nothingness, but it can also heal the user and bring concepts to life. What's more is that it seemingly does not require any cursed energy or even any major cooldown period. It happens to be the only technique in the series that seems to mock the power system itself. However, its drawback is that the user genuinely needs to find humor in what they are imagining, or Comedian stops being effective. The only canon way to counter the technique is by discouraging the user and making them second-guess their jokes, like my high school crush often did. With the right user, like a goofy and nonchalant anime YouTuber, Comedian has the potential to surpass all other broken techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen. Last but not least, we have Sukuna's iconic Malevolent Shrine domain expansion. So far, it is the only barrierless domain expansion that does not abide by standard domain rules. With this near-invincible technique, the user can hack and slash away at enemies caught in the range indiscriminately with the domain's sure hit effect. The domain will not stop its merciless delivery of judgment until all that remains is ash and dust. Moreover, the only way to combat this all-powerful technique is by injuring the user to the point where they can no longer sustain the Malevolent Shrine. However, that becomes an impossible task when you take into consideration the devastating cleave and dismantle abilities giving it to you rough. What's more is the jaw-dropping range of the technique, which expands to a whopping 200-meter radius. This means that the targets cannot even rely on repositioning or feeble attempts at escape. If the opponent does not instantly perform a domain counter, death is guaranteed. Sukuna was able to chop down special grade enemies when he only had 2 fingers to his name. Furthermore, the insane continuous damage output makes endurance fights seem like a pipe dream. Oh no, Malevolent Shrine does not even take the time to ask if you are ready. You're dead the moment you decide to face the user. This technique is brutal aggression distilled into a single ability. With no barriers or models of interception, all that remains is constant and unavoidable devastation every time it is used. We, lowly viewers, are reminded that Sukuna is an antagonist that does not fight fair, because it was never a part of his design. That wraps up today's list of the most broken techniques in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. I hope this gets you amped up for the upcoming 3rd season, because I cannot wait. Comment down below your favorite technique from this lineup. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, or I will summon your mortal enemy, Malevolent Soap and Body Spray.